Okay, so let us carry on with the topic of sexuality and gender in psychology. And the previous lecture, this I believe is our third lecture. The previous one ended, we were talking about primary and secondary characteristics. And I said when we come back, we will talk more about the terms on this slide. So this really is not intended as an exhaustive list, but it is intended to illustrate the complexities of human sexuality and the relationship between our understanding of human sexuality and society. So if we were together, I might ask you, hold on, I'm trying to do a couple things here at one time, and I should know better than to do that. But if we were together, I would ask you, how many of these concepts are you familiar with, and sort of go around the room, and it would take quite a little bit of time. But it just is so. I guess you could do that now. You could consider like how many of them are familiar to you. A lot of them are relatively contemporary terms. I took human sexuality in college, and many of these concepts were really not discussed, were not in the textbooks. Young people coming of age today probably are more familiar with the complexity of these concepts than certainly than I am. Well, I won't say that I am, but in my generation is. Okay, so real quickly, I'll just run through some of them. So sex refers to biology. Gender is how you are. And in the next lecture, I'll talk more specifically about what gender is. And if you were to take this concept or this topic in Soch, we focus almost exclusively on the role of gender. Gender is what we call a social construct. It is an idea. What we have done in our culture is we have attached our body, which is our sex, to the way that we interact, and the way that we interact and think and dress, and those components of our being, those are all tied to gender. And so we have what sociologists would say sort of arbitrarily attached things like our dress, our occupation, our ways of being to our body, to our sex. So those are not the same. Gender identity refers to how I think about myself. I identify as male or female. Gender expression is how I present myself. Do you wear female clothes? Do you wear male clothes? Do you express emotionally? Gender variant can be anything that's not, sometimes it's another term, I don't see it on this list, is called non-binary. So our culture has taken gender and has made it binary. It's either or. You are either male, you are female. So gender non-binary says I am neither male nor female. I am something else, something variant. Sometimes that is similar to this concept over here on the other column, which is gender fluid. And gender fluid is this notion that that your gender identity may vary, it may fluctuate. One day you may think of yourself as a more masculine man or a more feminine female, and sort of it just ebbs and flows, right? So you're not fixed. So maybe somebody that one day dresses, and this is far more familiar to us when we're talking about women, because women in our culture are really allowed a broader range of gender expression. A woman can dress masculine. She can wear pants, and Carhartts one day, and she can dress feminine the next day, and nobody goes, oh, she's gender fluid. But if a man were to dress very masculine one day and then the next day come in and wear very feminine clothes, we might be a little bit more like, what's going on there? And that's because our culture has we limit men's gender expression much more than we limit women's gender expression. So these, gender. Okay, so trans then, so there's a couple ways that we get these things mixed up. We don't often actually hear about the term transsexual. So trans refers to somebody that is in the process of transitioning or has transitioned, right? So transgender is probably the one we hear more about. Transgender is so I may have spent the first 15 years of the first 30 years of my life identifying as a female, but now I want people to begin to think of me as a male. So I begin the transgender, I'm transitioning. This isn't something that just happens overnight. There's a series of steps, and clinicians work with people who want to make that transition from one to the other. And so like today you'll hear the term the trans community, and the trans community are people that are either in the process or have completed that process. A transsexual is someone who has decided to not only change the way that they want people to relate to them, from one gender to the other, but they have taken the leap of changing their body. And a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot, but some people, some in the trans community will change their body, not because they really don't like their body, but because our culture has tied physical appearance, because it's attached one's physical appearance to one's way that we interact with them. So I have some acquaintances who are trans, and a particular individual, I knew this person as Mike. And Mike, amongst the people that know Mike as a trans individual, Mike goes by Kate. Well, I remember one time in a group of LGBT allies, someone said it would be a whole lot easier if Kate looked feminine for me to call them Kate. So that's an example of how we have how embedded these two concepts are in our culture, even though they really are separate concepts. But it's easier for people to think of this person as Kate when Kate's body or face looks like a woman. Another acquaintance of mine said that they made the full transition from a male body to at least physically outward a female body, including had the bones broken in their face to make them look more feminine, had their Adam's apple sort of, I think he shaved it down, had voice lessons so their voice was higher. They did all of that because there was not a place in our culture for someone who was neither in the middle. Right, who was neither male nor female. Now, this was 10, 15 years ago, and this is changing very quickly. So maybe in some communities, in some places, that would be more acceptable. So that's what these. You have a non-op person. So that might be somebody who takes hormones, maybe takes testosterone or takes estrogen, or pre-op. So there certainly are some procedures that are easier. So like top surgery is not an uncommon procedure, where someone might have their breast removed or might have breast implants. Bottom surgery is more complicated. And it's also worth noting that a lot of insurances don't pay for this. It's very expensive. It's hard to find doctors to do this kind of work. And it's commonplace for like doctors to say you need to present, you need to have a gender identity of that sex before I begin to do these procedures. My daughter did go to school with a person who I knew this person in sixth grade as a girl on the softball team. And right around puberty, when her body would have sexualized, would have matured, they started taking estrogen suppression and testosterone. And today, when you see this person, you would never have imagined, so they'd be like 20, 19, 20. You would never have imagined this person was ever thought of as a girl. They look very masculine, have facial hair, they look very masculine in outward appearance. I know they had top surgery. I don't know about anything else. That's not something we typically talk about. So intersex and hermaphrodites, again, hermaphrodite is kind of an old-fashioned, outdated term. Intersex is sort of the one that, because it captures everyone in there. Cisgender, I don't know if that's the right, I think I might have that spelled right, it might be CIS. Cisgender refers to when your body and your identity are the same. I am cisgender. I will out myself right now. I have a vagina and I identify as a female, right? So I would be considered cisgender. Now, these terms get down to the actual, so sex here refers to, it's an adjective over someone's body. Gender is how we interact socially with our clothes on. These terms refer to sex as the verb. So these are the sexuality terms, right? This is what turns you on and how you do it. Transvestite is someone who gets sexual pleasure from dressing as the other person or as the other gender. So like say a person with a penis who wears like, lacy thongs and things like this might or like wears women's clothes or clothes that are traditionally women's clothes. I'm kind of screwing up my face because I'm like, yeah, but is anything really women's clothes? Isn't that what we're challenging here? But anyway, so somebody who wears clothes. Sexual orientation refers to, and the way think about this one is if you think about orientation as the direction. If you ever learned orienteering in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, where you learn how to use a compass, orienteering, right? Sexual orientation is the direction of your sexual attraction, right? And then we could get into the complexities of what I mean by attraction, but basically, what direction do you go if you want to get turned on, right? So that's your sexual orientation. And you can have a gender identity of one and an orientation of another, and then actually engage in the sexual practices. So there's something called your romantic versus your sex. So I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, asexual is a kind of sexual identity. Sexual again being the action where you aren't really attracted to anybody, right? So, and this used to be considered a sexual dysfunction. The asexual community says, hey, wait a second, just because I don't get horny when just because I don't get turned on doesn't mean I'm dysfunctional. It just means I don't, right? So that's the asexual community. The pansexual is like anything goes. If you watch Schitt's Creek, if you watch that movie, the character David in that movie, where he talks about how he likes red wine and white wine, he doesn't really care about the labels. He identifies as a pansexual. So he doesn't consider himself heterosexual or homosexual. Okay. LGBT. These letters get longer and longer as time goes on. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersexed, and Q. And sometimes Q stands for queer, and sometimes it stands for questioning. Queer is a collective term that refers to basically everybody who's not straight, right? Everybody who's not straight and cisgender falls into the category of queer. And then heterosexual privilege is less of a thing than it was certainly when I was coming of age. But heterosexual privilege refers to the ease with which heterosexual people can live their life, that they can call each other, they can refer to their partners, this is my husband, this is my wife. They don't have to have code words. But like I say, these things are kind of different than they used to be, but certainly 20, 30 years ago, homosexual people couldn't get married and they referred to their partner as their roommate, and they couldn't have health insurance coverage, and they couldn't see them in the hospital. So heterosexual privilege is not as much of a privilege as it once was. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there and we will carry on with the next chapter. Next slide.